welcome to this Women Deliver Live Town Hall special from the Digital Media Zone at the UN General Assembly in New York. I'm Andrea Sankey from TRT World News, and today we're discussing how the health, rights, and well-being of girls and women are critical to achieving these sustainable development goals. We'll also be looking at the role of advocacy in bringing about change. Let me introduce my fantastic panel we have joining here today. Let me start with Toyin Saraki. She is a healthcare philanthropist and the founder and president of the Wellbeing Foundation in Africa and a lifelong committed advocate of gender equality. To her right is Fshat Ul Hassan. He is a Women Deliver Young leader and the chairperson of the Youth Advocacy Network in Pakistan. Thanks so much. And to my right is McCrummen, who is the Senior Director of Global Community Impact at Johnson & Johnson. And of course, we're joined by our audience, who is an international collection of advocacy and activists and experts, as well as some healthcare providers joining us here and journalists. So welcome all. Well, let's get started. And the first question I'd like to start with is more of an overview of the SDGs. And whether you think there is really enough focus in these goals, particularly on improving women's health and female empowerment. Let me start with our first female guest.
You know, I would say that the issues to women's health are not as clearly cut as they should be, but in a way they're more realistic. Because really, as a woman and as somebody who comes from Africa, I will tell you, if you say to somebody, how do you feel? They're going to say, I'm suffering. They won't say, oh, my education is low today, or my health is low today, or my economic empowerment is low today. So I think the way the SDGs are crafted now actually is more like real life, because real life is complicated. And we have to take an integrated approach to making it better.
Okay. Fahasat?
Thank you very much. I think being a boy and being a young leader, woman leader, young leader, I think it's very important to engage men and boys as well, so that they can play their role in the communities as well as at their homes, from where actually we can start bringing change. So in terms of SDGs, I think it should be cross-cutting, not only for one goal, but also all rest of the 16 goals, where we need to improve the gender equality as well as the role of the women to achieve all the SDGs.
Okay, Pat, I do want to talk more about specifically the men's role in advocating for women and girls. But Pat, let me just ask you, your opinion of the SDGs themselves, and do they contain enough about?
They probably contain enough, but I agree with Toyin that they're not nearly as clear-cut as the MDGs were. And that can be a good thing, but it just is right now. I mean, the SDGs are the SDGs. At Johnson & Johnson, where we do a lot of grassroots advocacy, we believe that health is at the center of all of the SDGs. For without good health, you cannot achieve any of the SDGs. So consequently, we look at the SDGs as being really driven, and have for a very long time, by women and girls. Women and girls are the light of the universe, in my opinion, and bring life into this world, and without the ability to stand on their own, advocate for themselves and their communities, again, we will not achieve the SDGs, and that's why we feel it's so important to be here in these kinds of forums and work with wonderful partners like yourselves in order to get that accomplished over the next 15 years.
If I can play the cynic for a minute, though, and that you bring up the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, as a comparison, if those seemed to be a bit of a letdown in the end, and the SDGs were supposed to be the new take on getting this done, kind of where does that really leave us if you think they're still lacking?
Well, I think it leaves us in an interesting place, because there was recognition after the MDGs that it is much more important to have an integrated approach across all of them. And the MDGs didn't necessarily we didn't go into that era with that lens. We learned a lot from them. So I think that is one of the successes of the MDGs, is that we learned a lot and theoretically built them into the SDGs. The second thing is that it's important for us to remember there were a lot of successes out of the MDGs. Mortality is down in many countries, morbidities are down in many countries. I'm not sure we got as far as we could have in terms of what is now focused on SDG 5 in terms of gender equity, in terms of the kinds of things that we all in this room probably believe very strongly needs to be more solid, more forceful, and there needs to be more oxygen breathed into that effort.
Go ahead, Toyin. I saw you nodding in agreement, but...
For me, I agree and I disagree. For me, the MDGs were very good at shaping central policy. So we knew that there were these global challenges that people had to get their heads around. But as an African, it was always very difficult for me. If I was to stop somebody in the street and say, what is MDG 3 and what does that mean to you? They couldn't tell me what MDG 3 was. Now, the SDGs are much wider, but there's a lot of emphasis on bridging the gap between the individual and the environment and the infrastructure. And so even though they look a lot more complicated, I think within the SDGs, there are things that every person can take and make real in their lives. And those of us, like, our wonderful partners at Johnson & Johnson, or the young men, I'm seeing young men now saying, my strength will not be measured by the weakness of my female partner. And we never had that come out of the MDGs. So the SDGs are forcing us to think in a more layered fashion, in a cross-cutting fashion. And I think if we all just get our heads around it, it makes meaning to us as individuals. And then we register the impact, not from governments, from individuals and from communities, which is really the people we're trying to help and transform.
And with Fshat, there's a real issue with how these SDGs actually apply and relate to the young people that you encounter. We've heard a number of complaints that these are really out of reach for young people because they just feel incomprehensible. This feels like a bureaucratic paper that's been signed by people they don't know and means almost nothing to their daily lives. What kind of response are you hearing from the ground in Pakistan, and how do you think the youth can become more involved?
Yeah, I think I agree that there is still, I think we need to learn from the MDGs, like why they were not very much connected with the at the ground level or the communities. So same goes for the SDGs as well, because so far still there is a need to make it more friendly for the communities, for the young people particularly, because as you said, there is no, they don't have enough capacity to understand the language, or maybe to understand the indicators and further so on, and then particularly to make them further easier, all the language and the goals for the local communities. And the young people now, I think many of the young people are taking responsibility, like me. There are many young people out there who are contributing online in the communities, in the countries, and at international level as well. So I think we need to take this momentum up and further, so that we can further involve young people from the backward areas as well as from the rural areas.
Toyin, how do we make these goals, in your opinion, and working out of Africa, more relevant to young people?
Well, let me give you one example about how we have made these goals real to us. We were discovering in Nigeria that most of our children were dying in the first hour of life. So we have this program, Emergency Obstetric and Newborn Care, and we are training midwives on what to do in that first hour of life. In the 11 facilities that we have trained midwives in emergency obstetric and newborn care, which means we've taken these amazing SDGs and we've shrunk it down to a facility-led frontline midwife action program. We have not lost one mother. For me, with the young people, I think the mistake we, the old people, make is we're trying to translate for the young people. I would be throwing the question straight back to the young people. It's like when we first saw remote controls on TVs. We couldn't work them, but our 2-year-olds could work them. The young people should take the SDGs and they should tell us what they want from them. They are smart enough to give us the answers, and then we just put the frameworks in place. You know, I'm 52. I can't tell a 16-year-old what something means when even I'm still getting my head around it. So, you know, we should stop calling them leaders of tomorrow. You are the leaders of today. You tell us what you want to extract out of it, and then we put the frameworks in place. That's the way I see it.
Okay, later I'm going to ask you about how you're actually 52 when I thought you were about 21. But
that makes me the elder on this panel.
But let me get responses first to what you said from our other panelists. Go ahead, Pat, then Fahaz.
I would just say, Toyin, I agree that well, back to your question, the idea that these are complicated is true. And how people get their heads around them is really up to them. This is, at the end of the day, this is not about the SDGs. This is about a person in a community taking action for something that they feel impassioned about. And that's all that matters. If one more voice is added to something, it multiplies. And the more that happens because of a personal passion for one specific area, then that's great. And I think that's what we need to see from youth leaders, because this is yours. And we're there to support, but you've got to tell us what you need.
First of all, thank you so much for saying like young people and the adolescents are the present, and this is very important. And what you were saying, like what should we ask for? So I think now global leaders need to accept that young people are not just the recipient of the services. They should be treated as a partner. And when they will be partner, you would provide them the enough space. You will provide them the friendly environment where they can learn not only all these languages or the goals or whatsoever, and they would definitely will be able to contribute more than that we do have right now. So I think first of all, we need to accept that it is reality, they are there, they are not future. Secondly, we need to accept them as a partner so that they can contribute equally, and so that you can ask questions from them, as you were saying.
Pat, what about engaging the private sector? You can speak to that. What role do you play, being from a major corporation, in furthering the agenda of these goals and helping the women, the girls, and the youth?
Thank you. I think, the private sector is just like each sector of society is very broad and is very different in many countries. But from a private sector perspective, it goes back to my comment about what can you do. Each company has unique assets to bring. As the world's largest healthcare company, Johnson & Johnson focuses on resources, interventions in healthcare, the expertise and the innovation and the intuition that we bring to that, and finding the right partners to help us with the vision on the ground for what's needed. And that's how we see our role, and we have for the last 3 generations. There are new private sector companies or older private companies that have not really engaged. They may have been doing great humanitarian work around the world, but have not really engaged in the SDGs. And what I'm seeing from the sessions that I've attended over the last few days, there's a lot more engagement and interest from multilaterals and other organizations to embrace the will of private sector to want to help. They just need to be told how, right? And so there's old guard and new guard, and I think as over the past 5 years, I've seen slow but steady progress in embracing this idea that no one can do it alone. We all have to work together.
Is the corporate sector doing enough, in your experience, Toyin?
Well, I've been hugely encouraged. In the Nigerian sphere, the private sector has been incredible. I hosted a private sector outreach myself for the Every Woman, Every Child effort, and that has led to strategic partnerships. If you look at our partnership with Johnson & Johnson, we are bringing the cutting edge of life-saving care to midwives in villages where they wouldn't even have heard of that sort of thing. And it's having effects. Now I'm looking at financial inclusion. I picked my phone, I called a banker, and I said, give me 1,000-day bank accounts for pregnant women. And he said, why? And I said, because you know something? I want women to be able to save, to have a choice as to where they deliver. And then I also want that 1,000-day saving to help a woman space her pregnancies. Because if she can space her pregnancies by 2.5 years, her body has time to recover, her nutrition has time to recover, she's in better shape. Now, to this banker, he's just thinking, okay, well, how many new bank accounts are you going to give me? Commission on turnover. And I said, I'm going to give you 5.2 million new bank accounts every year, but they're not going to be rich people. But you will have economies of scale. So the private sector, I'd like to encourage them. You can do your business, and you can make your money, and you can change the world. You can transform somebody's future. Like you said, this is now about looking at individuals and seeing how the world can be a better, more productive, more effective, and a happier place for people.
Fshat, are you seeing the difference the cooperation with the corporate sector can make in the case of where you are in Pakistan?
Yeah, I think it's increasing. Their involvement is now increasing, but still we need some more champions like Johnson & Johnson who can inspire other corporate sector. And secondly, I think particularly when it comes to Pakistan, so we have seen like usually the corporates invest into the very soft kind of subjects. Maybe it's education or it's sports or something like that. But we really need to encourage the corporate to invest into real issues of young people, or in terms of SDGs if we are talking about, or for the young girls. So we need to invest in family planning, and I think we need to invest in contraceptions. We need to invest in, because Pakistan is having highest MMR in the South Asia. And then we have like highest unmet need. So we really need to also push the not only government but also the corporate, who should realize and invest in these areas as well, which are the real root cause for the other issues that we are facing in Pakistan.
Okay, I want you to talk about, though, the real challenges of developing these productive partnerships and also in effectively allowing corporates and private donors to donate. Who are the best partners? Should we be working more closely with governments, or is it best to work with the NGOs on the ground? Where are all these interactions most productive? And you can be brutally honest if you want. If you feel that governments have failed and that you feel that money donated suddenly disappears and goes to waste, or that NGOs haven't been trained properly to spend more efficiently, let's say it. Let's identify what the problems are and actually building these partnerships, finding the right partners and making the biggest difference. Go ahead, Pat.
Well, first of all, let me say, partnerships have to be strategic. You just can't go into a partnership and say, here's a check, go implement what you need to do. That's not how they work. And partnerships are hard because of that. You have to both go in knowing that you have assets to bring to the table that can lead to some strategic and efficient and scalable interventions in whatever you are trying to accomplish. And you have to measure those, and you have to agree on those metrics and those measurements. Very, very important. To the question about who are the best partners, I think there are governments out there that really get it, and they really understand how their constituencies can be helped, fortified, and ultimately made successful, or be given a path to success through some of these partnerships. But they're not just public-private partnerships. They are partnerships with local community leaders, because ultimately they know what they need. It's partnerships with grassroots women and girls organizations, because they are oftentimes the voiceless that need to have that voice. And the private sector organizations who can facilitate very specific assets in those places, like telecoms for texting information on healthcare access, for example. Make for great partnerships, but as long as you know what you're getting into going in and you can measure it, there's a lot of success out there, I think.
Okay, go ahead, Toyin.
I would say that government doesn't really want to take risks. Government doesn't want to innovate. And that is where a body like Johnson & Johnson that is prepared to give a local grassroots organization a chance and strategically match that local grassroots organization with a global name, with a credible platform to provide the technical expertise. It gives the best of both worlds. I mean, from my experience, we were able to achieve the unimaginable. We have not lost a mother or a newborn from this program, and we have learned. We ourselves have upskilled, because before I used to turn back grants because it didn't fit the challenge I could see on the ground. So we now have this new area where it's shaped by need, it's driven by a purpose, but it's held to very rigorous standards of accountability that's good for everybody. And I would like to encourage the rest of the private sector to be like this. It's not really a risk. I don't know what you would say. I wouldn't call it taking a risk. I would call it investing in a hope that is measurable and has that impact. And we need to do more of that.
Yeah. I think both, I mean, all of the partners in terms of government, civil society, or the corporates, they do have their own role to play. We should not like just give one partner to like extra marks or the less marks, because everyone has its own role to play, which is very important. For example, though the government is very happy to invest on these kind of issues, but we really need to push them so that they can come up with those kind of policies and commitments to invest in these issues, because end of the day they are the responsible for the service delivery, for all kind of services in terms of young girls or the reproductive health rights or youth rights. So I think we need to make accountable all the partners, like how and where they are investing in terms of achieving the goals.
And I promised I'd also get back to what you were saying about getting men more involved in furthering the empowerment of women and girls. Quickly touch on that before I get to a final wrap-up question.
Yeah.
Why is it important that men are just as involved?
I think it's very important. I can give my example to make it further concrete. I belongs to a very humble background. Having a very conservative family. So me being a boy played a very good role to advocate for my younger sister. My parents don't want to let her go to the university because they were saying the environment is not very safe, or maybe there are some other issues. There are many other issues in countries like Pakistan, for example. So that's why I think we, the young people, particularly in terms of boys and the men, have, I think, more important role to play in terms of achieving the gender equality, because they have the say in the homes, maybe in the society, and of course in the legislation. So if we have more champions as a man, they can definitely bring a major change.
Okay, final question, Toyin. I'm just going to give it to you. I just want to know personally what you will commit to achieving the SDGs, particularly for women and girls.
I am committing to putting information in the hands of pregnant women and girls. I'm committing to doing what I can to make sure that every pregnant woman has a midwife, but I also am committing to make sure the midwives are properly skilled, properly paid, properly deployed to the heart of the solutions to global challenges. So help me God.
Fantastic. He will be helping. Okay, I'd like to thank all three of our panelists so much for joining us, and of course for our audience as well. Thanks so much for being with us in the UN Digital Media Zone here at the UN General Assembly gathering in New York. And remember, you can hashtag SDG and follow us on Women Deliver Live, and we will be with you throughout just the rest of this afternoon on this final day. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.